Hello everybody, Disciple here with Overwatch Curios. I'm sure you guys have watched some of the pros and Grandmasters in Overwatch and seen that the game is played a bit differently at the top tier competitive level. You might notice some of the techniques and strategies they use, but they can be easy to miss if you don't know what to look for. Now, if you're looking to climb in competitive, there's definitely a ton that you can learn from them. Today I teamed up with my friend Rafflegator, coach of Fnatic's Overwatch squad and Grandmaster top 500 player, to bring you guys 7 tips and tricks that Grandmaster players use in pretty much every game. Now, some of you might already know how to use these, but remember that the biggest difference is that pro players do this with absolute consistency pretty much every game. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and if you guys like this type of video, we'll definitely make more. Anyways, let's get started. Our first tip is all about AD or strafe spamming. What this means is, in a fight or when you know enemies are going to be shooting at you, hit A and D to strafe left and right for mostly random distances and durations. Someone running in a straight line is insanely easy to track, and someone like McCree or Widowmaker can land easy headshots. To a top level player, someone running in a straight line is essentially the same as them standing still, since they're so used to tracking movement. Zigzagging as well as crouch spamming in 1v1s can keep you alive for far longer. If you ever find yourself in a 1v1 situation, make sure your movement is as unpredictable as possible. Moving your character will, in turn, make aiming more difficult for you, but this is something that you can improve with practice on your own. When practicing your aim on the practice range or in quick play, make sure that you're moving constantly so you don't get in the habit of standing still. A McCree with godlike aim will still get blown out by a Widowmaker if he has to stand still constantly. Make sure to check who you're up against as well. If the enemy team has hit scan characters, then zigzagging while running anywhere in the open is absolutely essential. If the enemy DPS is in slow projectiles like Pharah or Junkrat, then strafing is still very important as well, but you have to be a lot more careful that you don't actually sidestep into a bomb. The final related tip is to strafe while jumping to make your jump more unpredictable. Typically a jumping target is pretty easy to hit since their mobility is limited when they're in the air. To combat this, try strafing against your momentum while jumping so you don't move as far as the enemy predicts you to. This should hopefully dodge a few headshots that would have otherwise killed you. Moving on, our next trick is another specific in-game technique. Now, you might have seen pros suiciding in tournament matches and laughed at them, wondering why on earth they'd kill themselves. However, this is actually a strategy that you should be using in your own games. If your team has lost a fight and there's no way you can easily retreat, you should attempt to find the nearest edge or hole to jump into. Killing yourself accomplishes 2 things. Most importantly, it allows you to spawn around when your team spawns. One of the worst things you can do in Overwatch is have staggered respawns, where some of the members of your team are dying as others are just running out of base, and it ends up making the entire match 5v6, 4v6, or even worse. If 4 or 5 of your teammates died, instead of trying to be a hero in 1v6, make the smart move and try to get your respawn in line with theirs by jumping off the side of the map. The other benefit to suiciding is that you deny the enemies their ult charge by damaging you. Your enemies will gain ult charge when they deal damage to you, but if you jump before they can shoot you, then they won't be able to charge up their ults quickly after a fight. Since they've likely used their ultimates in the fight that your team just lost, they're happy to grab as much DPS as possible so that they have the ult advantage in the next fight as well. This might feel like a weird strategy, and it can take some getting used to, but it's definitely a huge tool in team play and something that you should be doing in your own matches. Trick number 3 is all about ult charges, namely tracking your enemies. Although there's no way to tell specifically if your enemy has an ultimate unless you've got a Sombra or you see it in the kill cam, you can develop a good intuition for tracking when they have ultimates. Has the enemy soldier been piling damage into Roadhog? Has Mercy been healing their frontline constantly? Did Zarya use her ultimate on point A? Keeping these things in mind and talking about them in voice comms is essential for choosing your targets. If you know the enemy Reinhardt has his ultimate ready, then your own Reinhardt or Mei can be far more ready to block it for your own team. Additionally, knowing which team has the ult advantage allows you to pick better fights. If you feel like the enemy team has 5 or 6 ultimates and you only have 2 or 3, you can be pretty sure that you're going to lose the next fight. Instead, try and spread out and bait out a few ultimates while you charge your own. Even if you guys die or you lose the fight, just save your own ultimates so that in the next fight your team can have the advantage. Grandmaster trick number 4 today is to learn when to poke. Now, I'm sure the majority of players will take any damage they can get on the enemy team, especially to charge their own ult. I'll admit that I do this all the time on Zarya. Since my ult takes so long to build, I spam my alt fire constantly. However, this isn't always the best move. Before you poke, you need to remember that healing builds ult charge as well for your enemy supports. If any damage you deal in poke is healed, then you're indirectly contributing to an opposing sound barrier or resurrect. Now sometimes this is okay. In an instance like Mercy's ultimate, which charges quickly enough that she likely has it every fight, you're fine to poke. However, some ultimates, like Ana's Nano Boost, can have huge early game effects. Say you're defending point A and you're spamming poke as Junkrat. You might actually be inadvertently giving their Ana an insanely fast Nano Boost, which will allow them to take the point before your own team has their ults. If the other team has a support that likely doesn't have ult, try and be more concentrated in your fire. Use your DPS to break shields and go for focused killing blows instead of general poke damage. Tip number 5 is something you can do out of game to improve your in-game performance. Practice versus Anabots. Now, there are certainly things you can accomplish on the practice range, especially with a character you've never used before. However, when learning to headshot on a hit scan character, the single best practice you can do for yourself is this. Head into a custom match, fill the enemy team with Anabots, and, very important, set it to headshots only. Now, in-game, you're going to be able to practice your aim against a very small and difficult target that can't hurt you back, since Ana can't technically headshot. More importantly, however, you're only going to receive positive feedback, a hit marker and damage, by landing a headshot. This does wonders for your muscle memory, since instead of being rewarded for any hit and teaching you bad aim, you'll get a feel for exactly when you land a headshot. The practice range dummies have fixed movements and register body shots, meaning that you aren't actually learning very good habits for the game. Work on being 100% accurate at first, even if you have to stand still or shoot pretty slowly. Over time, work yourself up to shooting more quickly while moving or crouching. This technique works best for McCree and Widowmaker, since these are heroes you should be headshotting on 100% of the time, but it can also be useful for Tracer, Soldier, and Sombra practice as well. Use this technique as often as you can afford to, and if you really want to take the climb seriously, try playing at least one bot game before you go into ranked every day. It's a great warm-up and it'll teach you some amazing habits that you don't get from the practice range. Up next, I want to mention another aiming technique that may take much longer to master. Use your arm, not your wrist. Now, most casual PC gamers will play with their wrist resting on their desk or table and use that as the pivot point to move your mouse. This is very easy and comfortable, and for most online games it works really well, since with a high enough sensitivity, you can maneuver most of the screen with your wrists and fingers. However, when it comes to an FPS game, like Overwatch, this is actually a terrible habit, and it'll severely lower your aim at high levels. At the pro level in FPS games, almost every single pro will play with very low in-game sensitivity, meaning that they have to move their mouse much more to go the same distance as you do. If you keep your wrist on the table, then your range of movement is far more limited, meaning that too low of a sensitivity and you can't even turn your character around or aim at the edge of the screen. To begin aiming the correct way, lift your wrist off of the table and start using your entire arm to aim. Now, this is going to feel incredibly uncomfortable, but it's extremely beneficial for two reasons. First, it allows you to play with a low sensitivity, which in turn allows you to aim much more precisely. Secondly, since you're using much larger muscles and making much bigger movements with your mouse, the muscle memory that comes with aiming in practice will be enormously more impactful. Your brain can much better understand and remember moving your arm X amount to hit a target Y distance to the right or to the left, whereas with your wrist and fingers doing the aiming, it's much harder to feel the exact distances. Of all the tips from the video, this is definitely going to be the hardest to get used to, but it's also probably going to have the biggest impact on your performance if you learn to do it correctly. Start in bots or in quick play first, since it'll take a while before you get the hang of it, but it's definitely a huge hurdle to climb in improving your aim. Note that, unlike with Anabots, this technique is helpful for all characters since you don't just have to headshot, and you're really handicapping yourself in the end by aiming with your wrist. Finally, our last tip to give you is to be a leader in game. Now, this may seem like the most general of them all, but learning how to step up in game and guide your team is one of the most powerful techniques to gain skill rating. You can go ahead and complain about your terrible teammates that won't switch off of Torbjorn and say that's why you're stuck in gold, or you can learn how to lead your team into fights and figure out how to out-strategize the enemy team. In competitive play, if you can provide your team with a positive, confident leader, you'll increase your chances of winning dramatically. Become a leader at the beginning of the game. Talk in voice chat and try to figure out a team comp. However, the worst thing you can do at this stage is to try and criticize a pick or ask someone to switch because you don't like their hero. Instead, just try to figure out a good 2-2-2 or 3-2-1 composition. If this means that you have to play a tank or a healer, that might be so, but try and get heroes that everybody's comfortable with. Checking profiles might help you see if somebody has experience on tanks or has no idea how to play a healer. Then use this information to try and guide your team. Once you're out in a fight, use the previous tips to communicate and lead your team. Let your teammates know who probably has their ultimate, who to watch out for or focus, and how to collect yourself after a lost fight to try again. Staying positive and avoiding flaming at all costs is essential, since insulting a teammate will make your entire team stop seeing you as a leader. A team with a strong leader will always do better than a team without one, so you could even potentially carry yourself to a skill rating higher than where you deserve mechanically, simply because your in-game calls were good enough to beat your disorganized opponents. Now that's it for our Grandmaster tips and tricks for now. For some of the more complicated points like aiming with your arm or being a leader in game, we might make future videos explaining them more in depth. Finally, I'd like to thank Rafflegator again for consulting with me on the list, as well as Grandmasters Calvin and Kabaji for the tips they provided. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.